Welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. Now, the United States has unveiled a national security strategy that calls for halting further NATO enlargement and pushes EU allies towards to assume greater responsibility for their own defense. Washington argued that this marks a shift towards a more sustainable alliance, but many in Europe sees the move as a withdrawal of American commitment. Joining us today on TVP World is Reuben F. Johnson, Director of the Asia Research Center at the Casimir Pulaski Foundation, to analyze what this means for transatlantic security as well as European stability. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Yes, hi. Thank you for having me.
So we're looking at this new U.S. strategy, which calls for freezing NATO expansion. From a European security standpoint, how serious is the blow?
I'm trying not to sound dramatic, but I think this is absolutely disastrous. There's like some basic rules in international politics and in the business of national security. Number one is you, as Napoleon once said, you never interrupt your adversary when he's making a mistake. But then number two, right behind that is, you do not ever tell your adversaries what you won't do. And ever since the Russians have invaded Ukraine in 2022, and Joe Biden was president then, both his administration and this administration have specialized in telling the Russians what we won't do, so they know where the red lines are. Now we've told them we won't expand NATO. I fail to see a positive angle for this decision. I simply can't find one.
Right, and it does seem like Ukraine's not taking it very well as well. We have a recent statement from the Ukrainian ambassador to Poland on this matter. Let's take a look, and I would like to get your response for that.
Neither Vladimir Putin nor Russia have nothing to do with NATO membership of Ukraine. Ukrainian membership in NATO is the key goal of our foreign policy. It is in our constitution, and no one could put us aside from this track. Another story is when it will happen. Now we are in discussions with all our partners, and it's dependable on Ukraine and on the NATO partners to decide whether and how Ukraine will become a NATO member. The whole system of resilience of Ukrainian society and Ukrainian state will be very fruitful for the whole NATO countries, because today NATO is actually a little bit on the backside of the today's situation. Yes, helping Ukraine, but we need a strong signal that Ukraine will be, as it was in Bucharest summit, the NATO member, and it should be proved by practical deeds.
We've just played the soundbite from the Ukrainian ambassador to Poland, which still seems to be a little bit optimistic about the prospect of NATO. Do you think that there is still a chance, or has Washington kind of made the line very clear?
Because I don't know where the line is. And the reason I don't know where the line is because the administration keeps flipping back and forth between the different players. You know, you had Keith Kellogg, who was a very capable and competent individual in charge of the U.S.-Ukraine issue. He was the special envoy. And then he was marginalized, and now he's fed up, and now he's leaving in January. So they've handed this over to Steve Witkoff, and he's not dealing with the Russian foreign minister because the Russian foreign minister hates Kirill Dmitriev, that's who Witkoff has been dealing with. It's not really clear where the lines of authority are on this. So, and I don't know where this decision comes from. It makes no sense. But I would ask everybody within the sound of my voice to check online and listen to what Garry Kasparov said in Washington at the Halifax Security Forum just a few days ago when he talked about NATO. And he said, what is NATO? He said, it's a joke. It's 4 letters. It's not doing anything. Ukraine, which is not even a NATO member, is fulfilling NATO's destiny. NATO was created for one reason and one reason only, which was to keep free Europe, to keep Europe free of Russian aggression, to keep Russia out. Everyone seems to have forgotten that. And it's not about how many tanks you have, as he said. It's not about how much ammunition you have. It's not about any of the. It's, are you ready to fight? And the situation is the Russians are ready to fight. They're ready to let their people be killed in incredibly insane numbers, and the Europeans don't want to, with a few notable exceptions, like Poland, I would say, is ready, but many European nations are not. The European members of NATO. So this is an alliance that needs a shock treatment, in my opinion.
Do you think that it's the, well, not just the Washington administration, but perhaps NATO as a whole kind of has lost its way and its identity and kind of forgot its own mission, or perhaps there's an attempt at actually dismantling or make it less effective the way it is with what the U.S. administration is doing right now?
Well, these are not my words. These are the words of a man who was one of the most powerful Pentagon policymakers for decades, Andrew Marshall, when he was still alive. And he used to tell me all the time, he used to say, the Europeans have spent the last 25 years going out of the business of defending themselves. Yeah, not only has the alliance lost its way, but look at what are we finding out in this Ukraine war? This is something I've been screaming for more than 3 years now, which is that look at the production rates on weaponry, on ammunition, on everything. They're anemic. You cannot sustain a large-scale military conflict for any length of time at the levels of production that we've got in our defense sector. And people keep trying to expand, and they keep trying to spin up and go into surge production. But okay, that all takes time, and it's taking too much time. It's not happening fast. It's not happening fast enough.
Now, there's a line of thought that Europe have been over-reliant on the U.S. for its defense. Do you think that maybe this is a very big wake-up call for Europe to increase their production, to actually take defense into their own hands? Of course, the rhetoric has been there since the beginning of the war in Ukraine happened. But do you think that this is another jolt that perhaps will kind of spring Europe into action?
If this would spring Europe into action, no one would be happier than me. But what does that mean? What do we see in fighting in Ukraine alongside the Russians? We see between 5 to 20,000 Cubans. We see 15,000 or more North Koreans. We see another 10 or 12,000 North Korean workers backing them up. We see Chinese volunteers. We see thousands of Laotians clearing mines. This is World War III. There's an international coalition of evil that's supporting Russia. Okay, so look at all the people the Russians have helping them. The North Koreans sending millions of artillery shells. The Chinese essentially financing the war. The Indians buying as much oil as they can, hand over fist, to keep sending money to support the war, and so on. But let me ask you, how soon do you think you're gonna see Spanish or Greek or Portuguese or Italian soldiers in Ukraine fighting on the side of NATO? Never. It's never going to happen. Everyone's terrified to put boots on the ground. Vladimir Putin knows that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this also paints a very drastic contrast. You're just telling us about how many different countries are engaged with Russia, forming its alliance. While here in Europe, we've constantly talking about this term war fatigue, and about how this current engagement Europe already has, the populace already feel like it's well, far enough, if not too far. How do you square like this round peg at this point?
These people talking about war fatigue are a bunch of hypocrites. The reason they got war fatigue is because when this thing first started, we were drip feeding weapons to the Ukrainians. Everybody seems to forget, for the first year, the Ukrainians didn't have an arsenal of Western hardware. They didn't have piles of munitions. They had a petting zoo. That's what it was. So we drip fed weapons to Ukraine. We gave them just enough to barely not lose, but not enough to win. So the war could have been over by now. There was a period of time in 2022 that if you'd poured weapons into Ukraine, you could have affected a real outcome. But those days are gone. The Russians have had time to scale up. So I don't have any sympathy for these people. The people that talk about fatigue, they're the ones that gave us the situation we're in.
All right, a lot of very good points. And of course, we are looking at a disengagement once again from Washington. And it does seem like the situation for Ukraine is going to look a bit bleak going forward. In the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight, and very strong words here. And I think that's a lot of what European leaders need to hear. Really appreciate it. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me again.
Appreciate it. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. For more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.